So, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of afikra. I'm Ashraf Abi Saeed, a game developer from Lebanon, and today I'm going to be having a chat with Fawzi. Hi, Fawzi.
Hi, Ashraf. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Fawzi, I would love to introduce you, but I think you would do a much better job of doing that yourself. So, would you go ahead and tell us what you've done, who you are, and stuff like that?
All right, cool. Hello, everybody. My name is Fawzi Mesmar. I am a game designer, creative leader, and author. I've been working in the games industry for now around 20 years. I started off as an independent developer from Jordan in the Middle East, where me and a bunch of friends wanted to make an independent game back in 2003 while we were in university. And across several places around the world and a lot of video games from the Middle East to New Zealand to Japan to Europe. I've worked on a lot of different video games across several companies. I was head of design at EA, looking after the Battlefield and the Star Wars Battlefront franchises. And I'm currently VP of editorial at Ubisoft. Working with creative teams around the world on several game projects, with our latest release being Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope on the Nintendo Switch. And as an author, I wrote a book called الخل في فن تصميم الألعاب, or الخل in the art of game design, the first book on game design in Arabic. And I do a lot of other stuff here and there. But I guess we're here to talk about a bit of that as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a friend coming from the US, so I was able to snag a copy because
Oh, wow.
yeah, I was super happy with it. I'm I'm still reading through it, but I absolutely love the fact that it's very well written. It's very concise, and
Oh,
honestly,
thank
it's
you.
great for everyone from like beginners to intermediates to expert game developers, designers, and stuff. So I'm just loving what you've done so far, and the
Oh,
font.
thank you so much. Uh,
I was so surprised. It's so easy to read. I was just really happy with it.
oh man, that's super good to hear. I've had like divisive feedback about the phone. Some people are like, "Oh, it's too artsy for my eyes," and others enjoyed it. So yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy that you get the chance
That's awesome.
to to read it. I'm looking forward for your feedback once you finish it.
For sure, for sure. So can you tell us a bit about how you got into the games industry? Like everyone has a completely unique story. So, tell us a bit about.
Yeah, you're right. I often ask people, how did you stumble into the games industry? Just because everybody has such a unique and different story to go into this. And this is a podcast, so I assume that I'm gonna be able to tell you the long story instead of like being being short and non-concise.
We're here for it, absolutely.
So, I think I've always wanted to make video games. Is the thing that I wanted to do since I was a little kid. My dad bought us an Atari 2600, and I just got hooked. Started playing Space Invaders, which is the first game I ever played, and I just couldn't stop. And I was just completely mesmerized by the idea of being in this virtual world, that I'm like a tourist and like going around, and very inspired by that. And I think when I was a young kid in kindergarten, they asked us, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And my parents are hoarders; they don't throw away anything, so we still have that piece of paper. And when all the other kids in class were writing that they want to be like astronauts and pilots and other cool jobs like that, I wrote, "I want to make games in Japan." So from a very, very young age, I was so infatuated with video games, and it's the kind of thing I wanted to do. And I think it's why it ended up like driving a lot of my life decisions, because I was always like, "Oh, does this thing help me make games? No, then not interested. I'm gonna like try to find the other thing that helps me make games." So in university, I met a bunch of like-minded guys. I studied computer science in the University of Jordan. And I met a bunch of other guys. We were all weebs, man. Like, really into like games, Japanese culture and stuff like that. And some of us were studying Japanese on the side together. And we wanted to make a video game. At the time, those guys, we're all programmers to some extent, and we had some artists. And I used to play music in a band. And the guys came up to me and they were like, "We would like you to help us write the music for this game. We're making this Game Boy Advance game back in 2003." Yeah, and it was just magical times. Like we all got together. The initial idea was that we'll make a vertical slice and we'll submit it as a graduation project for one of the other older guys in the group. I was 17 at the time, so this is why I have 20 years of experience, though I'm only 38, I think, at the time of this recording. So yeah, we just rented a tiny space above a baker's store, and we paid like $10 a month each to rent that space. It was very hot considering that there's a furnace downstairs, and we brought our computers from home. But hey, we always had fresh bread, so it was good food.
Absolutely.
It was a really good time. We all got together. We were working on this game during the day, and we're playing games during the night. It was my first experience as an indie developer, though I didn't realize it. And then those guys, and at the time, the entire game was 2.5 megabytes because that was the limitations of the Game Boy Advance. So in fact, the screenshot of the game is now probably bigger than the game itself, which
Wonderful. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. No, so yeah, I was just writing the music for the game, and the guys were like, "You're always the wise ass. Why don't you be also our game designer, since we're too busy coding the game ourselves?" So that's how I became a game designer, and it stuck. Basically, it's all I've been doing for over the past 20 years.
That sounds like a lot of fun, to be honest. You probably have most people's dream jobs, because whenever you meet like a young game designer and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna make the next Skyrim," and you ask them like, "Do you have a team of 2,000 people or something?" And they're like, "I am 2 friends." So the idea of starting out with knowing a bit about game design definitely helped you move from one step to another, correct?
It was a really cool experience because, one of the things I feel like very grateful for about my career is that I have gone through pretty much a lot of those experiences, from like being, 2 to 3 people dev teams to working on games with over 900 to 1,000 people. So I've seen the full spectrum of game making, and it's always fascinating in different ways. And there's a lot of the same principles of game design apply, yet every time and every project, it feels like an entirely new endeavor. Which wise I think it's always exciting. Like you can never say I've learned everything, because there's just something new coming on, a brand new experience. Every game it's its own project. Working with different people bring in like a lot of new experiences that you never think about. So yeah, it's one of the things that makes this industry so magical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Like, whenever you play a specific game and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I love the way they did this," and you play another game and it like completely flips whatever they did on the head, but it also works really well.
It's because it's like it's like this magical combination between a technical achievement but also an artistic achievement. So there is like craftsmanship about like, how did they do that technically, like really how did they manage to pull this off using the technology that they have. And there's also the artistic part of it, in which like every person is like putting a little bit of their own selves and personality and self-expression into their project, and then they both come together. So whatever game you're playing, there's always like those 2 parts of appreciation into like technically how did that come to be, and artistically what kind of experiences did those guys have to translate this into this video game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's honestly wonderful how we are able to create different worlds for people to experience and just travel through. And on this front, can you tell us a bit about what a game designer actually does? So what are some responsibilities you have? What are some things you can influence, and other things that people are like, this is our job, so, let us do it. So.
Yeah, I can definitely try to do that. So a game designer's role generally is to find the fun, which is a very like elusive way to describe it. So the game designer's role to some extent is to create the vision of what the game is supposed to be, to some extent. It's to collaborate with others of making this vision a reality. and it's tweaking that vision to make sure that it is fun for the players. So it's envisioning it, implementing it, and then tweaking it until it's a lot of fun. And at the heart of it, it's about, like, I define game design as decisions that you make about any act of play. And I believe there's a bit of a game designer in every single one of us. In fact, if you look at kids when they get together, put any three kids in a room, and then they will start to create a game. Like they will create rules, like even for games that we know. They'll be like, all right, so we're going to be two of us. I'm going to stand by the wall. I'm going to count in 10. You guys going to hide. Oh, he's too fast, so he's going to be on the other team. So it's not just that they've come up with an idea and they're making the rule set of what makes it a game. They're also tweaking it to make it fair and more fun and balanced. And in fact, they're applying all the principles of game design, because active play is just a natural part of us as humans. And we tend to gravitate towards us. So there's a bit of a game designer within that. It's like, if you have a group of people in a swimming pool and you just throw them a ball, and then they will end up creating a game themselves. Or like they'll be like, okay, you jump on my shoulder, you jump on her shoulder, and let's try to push each other in the water. And first person that falls in the water loses. That is game design. They've just invented the game, and then they started to play it out. And then as they play it out, some things worked, some things didn't. So they make adjustment to the rules. Or like, it's not fair. She's so strong. She's always pushes me in the water. Let's change the teams up or something like this. This is tweaking imbalance. And then that ends up being game design as well. So it's the same kind of principles, but we can apply it to board games, actual real life game situation, or to software. That is game design to some extent.
Yeah, 100%. It's also crazy how, more and more of the world are going towards the idea of gamification. So it's like they look at games and they're like, okay, people learn so much from them. And then they're like, how about we put this into games and stuff? So do you have any thoughts on the idea of gamification of the world in and of itself?
So like I said, we tend to gravitate towards play and fun anyway. And I think a lot of the designs that we apply to our video games can definitely apply to real life, because they are at their heart based on intrinsic motivations and human psychology to some extent of as you're making a game or anything that is supposed to be engaging, you want to connect psychologically to the person that is viewing or interacting with your work, and to be sure that there are elements that are interesting and captivating for them to be able to interact with it. And unlike most other mediums in which you could just sit back and watch or view, video games demand of you your attention as well as your interaction. So there is more research and work that's being done into like what could make something more captivating, and would want people to continue or want to join in and to start to interact with this thing. And a lot of those can apply to real life situations. And I think when we started to kind of like blend those two visions of the world, we started to get some really interesting things. And I think like one of my favorite examples is usually not the direct use of gamification, because people often want some serious use of the term. But like I loved it when Pokemon Go came out, and everybody like kind of downloaded it on their phones, and then they literally started going on walks because they will catch some Pokemons, and then they started like having conversations with strangers because, hey, did you see that Pokemon over there? What kind of Pokemon you're catching? Which team are you? And, because of the video game that they had of hand, it gave them all kinds of reasons to have this mystical or magical layer on simple everyday life stuff. And I think this is amongst the power and the beauty of video games, is that because of how it's captivating, it can affect our lives in that way. So imagine if you can, like, apply that same level of magic into I don't know, working out, or into dieting, or into collecting bottle caps, whatever it is. Like, there is an aspect of video games that can add that layer of magic with it.
Very fair, actually. I completely agree. I absolutely love the fact that you used Pokemon Go as an example, because we see a lot of memes of people being like, world peace was achieved when everyone downloaded Pokemon Go. So yeah, absolutely. I love this answer. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I have a question about actually stories in games. So are there any stories that affected you and kind of like pushed you towards games, or do you have examples of stories that games using stories to kind of tell people about a specific thing or a certain action or something of the sort? So do you have examples of games with stories that are not just fun, but more about, like, something that affects you to the core, kind of like an emotional movie or a book does?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I think I'm going to unpack it into two sections. Like, how I think games are powerful storytelling mechanism, and then I will mention some games that I really think that they did this in a very powerful way. So, as I mentioned earlier, like, video games, unlike any other medium, they demand your attention. That means, like in a Netflix show, let's say you're sitting there and you're receiving. And while you're watching, you can go like, I'm going to just look at my phone and answer a couple of text messages, then look back. And the show will continue to go on. Whereas a video game will be like, oh, you stopped watching, you fail. Now you have to start all over again. Like, it requires you to be actively involved within the video game. And so it's basically an interactive medium in which you're receiving and giving. You are an active part of how the experiences are unfolding in front of you. And this is where I think the power of video games lie, is because it allows you as the player to be an active part in the story as it unfolds. And I think some of the most powerful mediums in video games is that it allows you to explore narrative through player action and mechanics, rather than traditional storytelling mechanisms such as watching a cutscene or hearing a dialogue. So, for example, one of my favorite games from a narrative point of view that really moved me is a game called This War of Mine. And it talks about, how people were surviving during the war in Bosnia. And in a particular section in this game, so you will have like a hideout, and you have a bunch of people that are hiding and surviving the war as it happens. And in the game, you can take actions about how do you want to spend that night, into like, getting supplies or medicine, or just basically protect the people that you are responsible of. And at some point in the game, one of the people that you're responsible of gets sick, and you need to get the medicine. And we are now confronted with multiple choice. You can either go into a very heavily guarded barracks that has that medicine and try to break in there, and you could very much risk being shot and die. Or you can go to this other residence where two old people live. They are completely unprotected, and you can steal their medicine. They will not resist you. They will not harm you, but they will be affected by you taking the medicine away from them. Or you can choose not to do anything, and then the person that you're taking care of ends up dying. So as you can see, when you're put in that situation, the player needs to make a decision, and then they need to act that decision, and then the story will unfold based on their calls. And the most powerful thing happens in that moment is that when people describe that particular point, they don't say my character did this, or Indiana Jones did this. They say I stole the medicine, or I let the person in my home die. So it creates a very powerful sense of association between yourself and the character, because you make the call. You feel that you are personally responsible for how the narrative unfolds. This is something that no other medium is capable of doing. And there's so many examples within video games that allows you to do this. This War of Mine is an example, but there's Mass Effect as another example. You know, there's Papers, Please. There's all kinds of video games that I really love and enjoy that basically uses player interaction as a narrative tool. And no other medium can come even close to that power. When we're viewing a movie or reading a book, we all get the same experience. We might imagine some things differently in the case of a book, but it's still the same words on the paper. But when there's an interactive element to that game, as you probably would have heard from anybody who played World of Warcraft or even FIFA, they will describe their gameplay experience as something that is deeply personal to them, because they were the orchestrators of how that narrative unfolded to them. And that, for me, is probably amongst the most exciting parts of being a part of the game business.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like sometimes when I'm talking to people who don't play many games, I give the example of Batman. Like when you're playing a Batman game, you are the one that lets the bad guys go away. But when you're watching a movie, you're just, mad at Batman for doing something. So it's like you take yourself and you put yourself in the place of the player, instead of in the place of the character, instead of watching the character do something. So it kind of switches you from being a third person viewer to a first person experiencer or something of the sort. So yeah, it's honestly, I love this War of Mine. You gave such a perfect example, and anybody who's interested in playing games, you guys should probably try it out and see how you feel about it.
Yeah.
So,
I think no other medium can channel empathy in us in that same way. Like you feel for the character, you feel like Batman, you feel like Messi on the field. Like the video games allows you to really feel what it's like to be in someone's shoes, and that is such a powerful tool.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, I actually have a question on games that don't have a story and focus more on either entertainment, wasting time, or something of the sort. So let's take the example of Candy Crush. As a game designer, why do people enjoy these kind of games?
Candy Crush is also one of the games I worked on during my career. And I think that the narrative is not necessarily the only way why you're engaged with a video game. Video game, for the most part, it channels fun within you, so it activates a part of your brain that is enjoying it. And there is an inherent sense of fun in some things that we don't necessarily associate with fun. So, for example, before I bounce back to Candy Crush, I'm going to give you a bunch of rhetorical questions for you and the listener to ponder on. Would you consider being scared fun? And abstract, that sounds like a very odd question. Yet people line up for theme parks all the time, and they watch horror movies and all of that stuff. Would you consider the aspect of just collecting stuff to be fun? And there's people that love to, gather stamps from all over the world, or, go ahead.
We collect mugs and stuff, so that's something they're just all over the place. They're really so
right. You probably know, or maybe you're one yourself, one of those people that keeps organizing and reorganizing their bookshelf. Either by color or by size or in alphabetical order. And you don't even sometimes need to read the book. You just look at the bookshelves and touch the spines of the books as they're now currently in order. And that gives you an immense sense of satisfaction. Is this what you would traditionally label as fun, right? But it's something innate within us. Or somebody just grabbing bubble wrap and you're popping them one at a time. There's something inherently satisfying and fun within us. And as game designers, I think a lot of our job is to find those moments. If you notice that, I feel oddly satisfied of putting things in order. So I wonder if placing three things that look the same in order is fun. And and sure enough, you can create a gameplay experience that is basically around that. So a lot of the fun comes in not necessarily from identifying or relating with the story or have a direct emotional input that we associate with joy or anger or whatnot. There's a lot of fun in figuring out patterns. So if you like, there is fun in developing pattern recognition. In fact, this is one of the things that Ralph Koster argues about in one of my favorite books. Is called A Theory of Fun, and he argues about how fun at its heart is identifying patterns, and the minute you identify all the patterns, you start to get bored. So, for example, he uses tic-tac-toe as one of those examples in which you identify fun. And it's a game that is very engaging when you're first playing it. But once you figure out all the patterns, which is very finite, then it's no longer engaging. The fun is over. So fun goes beyond, the basic entertainment and all of that stuff. And, basing all the examples that I mentioned and trying to define what fun is, it will make a lot of sense why something like Candy Crush is super engaging. There's inherent fun in putting things in order. There's inherent fun in finding out a pattern in what seems to be chaos. There's inherent fun in overcoming something that is deeply challenging and even frustrating. So playing a level and losing so many times until you finally beat it, that is universally fun. Finding the different shapes across a seemingly randomly placed grid and make all the yellow pieces placed next to each other, figuring out that puzzle, that is fun. Things that are in a random order becoming in order is inherently fun for our brain. And Candy Crush as a video game can satisfy a lot of those needs. This is why this game has been downloaded over 3 billion times. It's as much as many games as I played, rarely would I be able to say that one of the games that I have worked on has been downloaded by half of Earth. And it's probably one of my most recognized games that I have worked on, and it's because it's so inherently fun for a lot of people, and it touches on a lot of those aspects that I have mentioned.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I've realized is the core gameplay loop of, putting things in order, the way the sounds pop, the kind of colors that you see, the satisfaction of the animation that you get either when you finish the level or when you just, put things in order. All of these things I feel also push the players to play the game more and more, because doing the act of putting things in order is fun, and seeing them disappear when you're done with that and just waiting for the next thing that you don't know that's going to come on screen is also pretty fun. Because there's fun in the mystery, there's fun in the actual game, there's fun in the actions that you do, and the fact that you have just a limited number of moves gives you a bit of a challenge. So it's like all of this meshed together gives you this wonderful little thing to toy around with, quite literally.
That's a super cool analysis, man. Following that discussion, you're absolutely right. And if I would go back to the Pokemon example that we've had earlier, completion is fun. And it's in the tagline, I gotta catch them all. The fun of the game is that. And is it about actually looking at the pictures of all of those? I don't know now, there are 300 or 400 Pokemon. I started to lose count after the OG part. There is inherent fun in finishing off what you started. So the idea that I have this one Pokemon and I can complete the Pokédex of all the Pokemons, there is an inherent fun in that sense of accomplishment and achievement. So it's not just the act of walking or the act of talking to people. There's also that northern star of one day I'm going to catch all the Pokemons, and then I will feel that satisfaction. The journey towards that completion itch is also fun in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's honestly it opens my eyes to different ways of seeing specific games and just seeing what I'm doing in a game. You've got like the achievement hunters that want to finish the game just to show off a badge of honor to a certain extent. You've got the people that beat games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, and they're like, oh my God, I beat one of the hardest games ever. So yeah, it's basically, it's fun to play the game, and you become proud of yourself for achieving something specific that you can show off, or, tell other people that you've done this, basically.
And you can connect that to a lot of other things, even in your daily life, that are like, that part of fun or completion is inherent to how we think. For example, in Ramadan, you're counting the days until the month is complete so that you can celebrate, an Eid, for example. Or, like if you look at like a lot of people who have a high sense of achievement, let's say they are working towards a goal of losing weight. And they have a target weight that they want to achieve in. And then usually once a week or once a month, they are measuring, they're doing the work. And then they're seeing, oh, I lost 1 centimeter of waist. I have 3 more to go. There's a sense of satisfaction there. So it's not just getting there like, all right, I have the beach bod and I'm ready to go, but it's also the journey towards that sense of completion that's happening that is inherently engaging. And that is, rolling back to what makes a game designer job interesting, is that you notice these things. And then you go like, okay, so in order for there are types of people that are deeply motivated with achievement. How can I recreate that experience within a video game to get them to feel that sense within this world that I'm creating as well?
Absolutely. Like I'm personally someone that doesn't enjoy working out because I feel like it's just lifting weights and putting them back in place. So
Yeah.
I did like a mini challenge. We have a whiteboard at home. So I wrote 0 out of 10,000, and I want to do 10,000 push-ups sooner or later. So every time I do one, I just, erase the mini number, and then I put it up, and then it just keeps increasing. So one of the reasons I like games is because you can't really lose, because even when you lose, you're just set back, but you don't actually fail in anything. Whereas in, exams and life and stuff, if you fail at work, you get fired. If you fail in class, you get held back. But in games, it's always like there's a level of I can try again, because failing isn't that big of a consequence. It's just like a mini setback for better experience, or like pushing yourself forward. So
100%.
Wonderful. So following on that vein, as a game designer, when how often are the projects that you show followed up with, and how many times are they like put to the side? How do you basically showcase that your work is something that people should work on and should be fun for players?
Oh man, it's the very act of design across all like any act of design, even if it's industrial design. I'm making a chair. Is you starting off with a problem statement of saying like, I want to create something so that these types of people can use it in this way. So in the case of making a chair, I'm saying I want to make this object that people can sit on and feel comfortable. So I start off by going to the board and imagining, what does this chair look like? Does it satisfy the needs that I have? Does it allow people to sit on it? Does it have enough space? Is it balanced enough so that it stays on the ground, so that it carries the weight of the people, blah, blah, blah. And then I put the design of what this chair is supposed to be. And then we review the design and go like, actually, the design of the chair you made requires 3 people to hold it because it only has 1 leg so that the person can balance on it. But how often do people have 3 people around to hold the chair? So maybe that's not good design. Let's move to something else. So there are some designs in which they are dismissed from the paper concept, in which we have an idea that is supposed to address that, a particular self-identified problem. Other people call it a vision. And you see if like the design satisfies that vision or not. And sometimes it passes the paper, go like, all right, I think I can make a chair using 3 legs, but make it completely out of paper mache. And then you make a prototype of it, or you make it, and then someone sits on it and breaks into pieces. And you go like, okay, so maybe that doesn't work. What else can we do? Maybe we can reinforce it with steel, and now it works. Or maybe and that is part of the design process, in which like we've moved from the theoretical design to accept and dismiss. Then we started to prototype and build. and test. And we test and see if people like it or not, and then we move forward from there. And a video game is no different than that chair example, in which, like, somebody can come up with an idea of going, like, I think collecting, hundreds of imaginary animals is going to be a fun idea. That is probably like the beginning of the notion, and then you start to put together a design. Like, so what does that look like? How do people collect these animals? How do they interact with the world around them so that they can collect these animals? And then like you review them together and go like, oh, this sounds like it can work. And I think the people that like this kind of stuff will like this. All of this checks out. Let's move on to the next phase and to start to build something, have people play it, watch them play it, then come back, make some changes, do it again until the game is ready and you launch it. That's like, in abstract how it works. So a lot of times the idea is dismissed from when it's in my brain before I even say it. It's in my brain and go like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it's like, nah, actually, that's terrible. So there's no need for me to say that even. And sometimes I'll be excited about something. I put it on paper and then I show it to a group of my friends, not even my colleagues. And I go like, I'm thinking about working on this. And then they start to poke holes at it. And they're like, yeah, you guys are right. I don't think this is good. So I then come back and make changes. Sometimes it's my colleagues and sometimes it's the end user that just gives us feedback about like how we didn't figure something out in the correct way, and then we see what kind of adjustments that we can make. Design at its heart, whether it's graphic design, industrial design, engineering, it's identifying a vision, planning it, and testing it. And testing it is a huge part of deciding when it goes forward and when it stays. So how often, you ask? I would answer all the time, pretty much all the time. Even if a project is there's so many small ideas that can go or can go not, that will go through that same process that I mentioned to you, dismissing it even from the brain phase all the way to the implementation phase. Sometimes we yank stuff out of the game just because it weren't working. And sometimes we delay a game because it wasn't working the way we wanted, and we make the adjustments so that it works. Sometimes it's magic and it all comes together from the first time, but that is never the case. So yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, like I've partially experienced that as well. You start out, for example, in game jams, when you meet up with someone and have to work on a game for like 2 days, you start super excited to like work on an idea, and then 2 hours later you're like, this is a bit too big, and then 40 out of 48 hours later you're like, oh my gosh, this is still too big. So you just cut off as much as you can from the game and just like shrink it or change the way it is, or just when you're introducing it, you introduce it as something completely different than what you started with. So yeah, game design is tough, but it's pretty rewarding when it works out.
Exactly, because like I mentioned earlier, there's a big part of you that's in that game. Mm-hmm. So the part of validation when like you see people that are enjoying this is because people enjoyed my ideas, my contributions, that part of me that I'm sharing with them. So there's an inherent sense of validation when you see people enjoying your work.
Absolutely. So I have 2 questions that are going to follow up with each other. So the first one is, where do you get inspiration to make, some games or some mechanics and stuff? And who do you feel can get into game design?
Okay. The 2 very related and can be quite unrelated questions as well. I'll start with the inspiration one. So I get inspiration, like the short answer is I get it from everything. Ultimately, we can't create what we don't know. So everything we make is coming out from something deep within us. So it could be our personal experience, it could be our personal preference, it could be our perspective, and it could be our own views of the world. So whenever we set out on making something, we are bringing all of that into the forefront to that thing to come out. And therefore, whatever input I get through life experiences, through reading books, through watching movies, through conversing with others, ends up inspiring me. And I think my biggest source of inspiration is through analogous inspiration. Analogous inspiration is when you are looking at a field that has nothing to do with the problem that you're solving, and then your brain somehow makes this random connection and an idea comes out. You know, like for example, the guy that designed the Nike Air shoes thought of that design while they were looking at the Pompidou building in Paris. The pipes at the side of the building made him think like, oh, it would be cool if there's a transparent pipe at the bottom of the shoe. And then he ended up making a shoe out of it. Even like, George Lucas was inspired by Casamia in Barcelona to design the helmets of the stormtroopers. The shape of them was inspired by looking at the building himself. So the eureka moment comes out when analogous inspiration is in full swing, is when you're thinking of what you want to make, and then you open up your eyes to the world for input, and you make that random connection. In fact, Archimedes himself, when he had his eureka moment, he wasn't doing physics. He was taking a bath. He wasn't like, in a lecture hall working on something. He was literally in a bathtub and looked at the water and goes like, eureka, I got it.
Yeah, light bulb pops up in his head. Yeah.
Pretty much. And being aware of this, I am constantly trying to get as much input as possible from everything. And then as getting that input, and sometimes I have this eureka moment, one way to groom ideas for inspiration, I like to talk about it with people I respect. Because as I start to bring up those ideas to those people, they will get inspired themselves. They'll be like, oh, this reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that. And then they're throwing in even more input. Or like, oh, if you like this idea, you should totally read this book, or you should totally watch this movie. And all of a sudden, like by discussing that eureka moment, I now have so many other sources that I could pile up to further nurture that concept to become a design instead of, just an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the fact that it's not just play games to make games. It's more like explore the world and see what's around you and take inspiration from everything that exists in your surroundings and things that are out of your comfort zone in order to make something that's great. Because some of the best games are ones that are innovative, and the only way to innovate is to look elsewhere, practically.
Absolutely. Like Miyamoto when he was a kid. So Shigeru Miyamoto is the creator of the Super Mario franchises, The Legend of Zelda, and many others. When he was a kid, he used to wander the streets of Kyoto, and at the sides of buildings, there were rain pipes. And as a kid, he used to look inside those rain pipes, and he used to wonder what's on the other side. As a kid, he thought that if I can manage to shrink myself and go into that pipe, I can probably come out at another world at the other end. And then later on in life, he made the green pipes in Mario, in which Mario goes into the pipe and literally comes out at another world in his games. So it was a direct inspiration from a real life experience and imagination and perspective that was directly translated into a gameplay experience.
Absolutely. And the fact that he also picked one specific mechanic for Mario to do, which is just jump, allowed him to be creative with specific constructs, what's it called?
Constraints.
100%. Thank you. So it's like a mix of inspiration, constraints, and vision, basically, that helps you make a pretty good game, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, like vision at its heart, as I mentioned it earlier, the game vision is basically a problem statement, is that I want to do this so that the players can feel that. So if you think about it, a vision is basically a problem statement, so it's constraints. So if I make a game that doesn't make people make this, then I didn't satisfy the problem. Therefore, I am outside of the constraints I put on myself. A vision at its heart, it's self-inflicted constraints. because ultimately we can't, it's very difficult for us to create without constraints. And even like in a blue sky or like imaginative, you can do whatever you want. You will end up creating constraints on yourself so that you'll be able to create within. I would argue that constraints is an essential part of the creative process.
Yep, agreed. This is wonderful. Thank you. loving this discussion. It's amazing to basically learn about this from you, a professional basically in the industry and stuff.
My pleasure, man.
So I do have a few more questions about your book and the region and stuff. So I guess let's start with your book. Why did you write it? I mean, there are a ton of game design books. So why would you write one, and why is it in Arabic?
Yeah. So like as I mentioned, when I started out, I just went through a lot of problems and problem solving, and everything I've learned was basically through trial and error. When I was starting out, I didn't know what a game developer even looked like. I've never seen one. Like they all seem to be like these mythical beings that exist in lands far, far away, and I had no idea if what I was doing was right or wrong. And I feel like I was in a fortunate situation that I've learned English at a young age. I could speak English, and I've had people that lived overseas, and every time they were traveling I was asking them to get me books so that I can at least get some validation from somewhere that what I'm doing is right. I made games for 7 years, and I still couldn't call myself a game developer because I didn't know if I was, because I had nothing to compare to or no one to talk to or to measure up towards. I think it was when I started working in an international company for the first time, I was like, oh, okay, I actually do know things. And and these guys are figuring out stuff the same way I was. Okay, so maybe I wasn't that far off. And it was really hard for me to get into the industry, and I went through a lot of imposter syndrome and self-doubt, and getting information was very difficult. And I just didn't want people to go through that same. I wanted people to be able to get knowledge that is available elsewhere, but without having to learn another language first. So the idea for me was always to spread knowledge. So I know people like it in written form, so I have that available in writing. It's the cheapest that Amazon allowed me to price it at. But even that, the entire content of the book I've recorded in a video format as a 1-week crash course on a platform, idrak.org. And it's available for everybody for free. It's an educational platform that is sponsored by the Jordanian government, and I collaborated with those guys to record it and put it on their platform for free. So if people can't afford to get the book, or it doesn't get shipped to them, they can get all of that knowledge. It's available for them for free on that website. And I'm very approachable, or try to be, and I'm very I try to be present in Arab game gatherings, and now try to even widen that influence to include even non-Arab regions, just on that point of trying to help people get into video games, but just because it was so hard for me. So it's very personal, the way I'm taking this. It was so difficult for me that I want to be the person I wish I've met when I started. And I am, trying to create that book to help people to get into game development. And this is why, the book is available in Arabic, because I feel like a lot of this knowledge is available in other languages. But now I'm working on another book in English. And this is about the creative process. So a lot of the stuff we discussed about inspiration, ideas, and originality. And I feel that I can bring something new to the international reader, but I will also reserve the rights to translate it to English, to Arabic. So it will be in Arabic at some point as well. But now I can the idea of giving back, I'm widening it as much as possible to kind of help people create and make games and join us as colleagues in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. This is honestly wonderful. And I keep looking through the book every now and then, and it's in between the pictures, between the different diagrams that you have, the way it's written and stuff, it's just, it's perfect for anyone who wants to get into learning it without having either a mentor or someone to look up to. This book is a pretty good starting point. So
That's so good to hear. Thank you.
absolutely. So on this, following this idea, what do you think is missing from the region in terms of just games, basically? Like, what is missing for people to make games? Because from what I've seen, we've got a lot of talented people, but it's just it's tough to see people put the talent into effect. So what do you think is missing as a pro?
So, like when I started making games, back then, there wasn't even that many people making games, even as independent developers. We were like, we were like weirdos. I think it was just us. And at the time, there was the guys in Syria, Afkar Media. They were making a game called Taht al-Ramad, Under Ash, I think, in English. And it was just like, only the two of us actually like, doing something about video games, at all. And then I remember, like, I moved away, and I was like, I worked in New Zealand and Japan, and I moved back to Jordan, and there was, grassroots projects that happened in Jordan, and there was like like I was invited to speak at the Jordan 7th Gaming Summit, and I was like, what? There's 7 of those? And I get on stage, and I see over 800 people in the audience, game makers, ranging from 12 years old up until like, adults. And I look at the Jordanian game development scene that is now spread across several regions. There are multiple companies now that range from publishing to development, from Afkar Media to Rababa Games to like all kinds of different Babel games. They're all good friends, and shout out to all of them if you're listening. And there are too many to mention. So like, there's now an ecosystem in which like there are games coming out, and there are people that are actively making games that started off from humble beginnings all the way to like now games releasing on PlayStation and Xbox and stuff like that. So we have like AAA, core AAA development that is happening within the region, and so the evolution is, and we have a bunch of exits as well. So we have a couple of companies that are actually like bought outright by other companies and got like further investment. So we have a scene and an ecosystem that is evolving and growing, and it only starts by like a bunch of people doing it, and then a bunch of crazy people, I guess, doing it, and then others looking at them and go like, oh, if they did it, then I can as well, and then let's go, and then we start to do that. And eventually, I think what we need is that one big hit that will create that juggernaut or that institute within the culture or the region that will start to gravitate all the talent when they make like bigger project, and then people will come out of that institute, and then they start to make their own smaller studios, and they do their own thing. Like I always use CD Projekt Red as an example of that in Poland, for example, in which like it wasn't known for games development that much, and CD Projekt Red was literally a CD shop that like started to make mods to grow to become a video game developer, to become one of the biggest game developers in the world. And basically it's a lot of people worked at CD Projekt Red, came out to do their own studios, and now we have a very active and thriving game development community in Poland. That same thing applied to many other places in Sweden. I think most studios in Sweden has somebody that was ex-DICE at some point, because it's a studio that's been in as an institute in the country that's been around for over 25 years. Over 30 years, actually, at this point. So when you have like a studio that's been in the region for 30 years and having a lot of success, people will go in, make a bunch of games, learn, come out, start their own studio, and they make something out of it. So we are slowly but surely heading there. We need that one game to hit, to create that institute for us to even have an even more thriving community. And I would argue that we already have that in the mobile space to some extent, and we need to start to see it happening across like PC and 360 PC, and you can see that I'm stuck in 2007 across like PC and console
and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead, Ashraf.
I was just going to say that here in Lebanon, we have a bunch of game companies. Like when I started working in 2020, I had known of around 4 or 5 companies all in Lebanon, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that, some of the companies here have like games with 1 million+ downloads. And as you said, most of them are on mobile. So I'm excited to see, what we're going to be creating on PC, on consoles and stuff, and something that is going to, hopefully hit big. And it's just like, again, just like we talked about in game design, we as Arabs have a completely different point of view on the world, on the way that we interact with each other, the kind of things that we would like to see, and the kind of stories that we want to tell. So all of this mixed together is going to give a really nice taste in new games that are going to come out. But just like you said, we need the crazy team that's going to take the leap and go for something pretty big. So yeah,
exactly. And we lack a lot in terms of like government funding and sponsorship, unfortunately, like where you can find that a lot more common in Europe and other places. But ultimately we have the talent, and I constantly tell like local teams in the Middle East is like, all you need is your brains, computers, and an internet connection, and luckily we have an abundance of all three. Even with the absence of like financial support, I do believe that we can overcome that and make something spectacular. I remember like when I met with the Nintendo folks very early on, they were like, "What, do you even make games in the Middle East?" We didn't even know that you guys even play games over there. And they told me something that stuck with me is like, they said that we've been telling stories from our culture for decades, and so were the West. But you guys are coming out from a completely different region of the world with a completely different perspective. We can't wait to see what you're going to end up making, like how can you bring this perspective to the world? And I joined them. I am very excited to see what games will come out of the region.
Absolutely. Yeah. So final question from my end. What do you think up-and-coming developers should do to get started?
Like if you want to become a world-class runner, you have to start running. If you want to be a writer, you have to start writing. So if you want to be a game developer, you have to start making games. And that could range from anything, making games on yourself, finding a bunch of people making games together, going and studying programming so that you can apply for a game-making job so you can make games, getting internships in companies so that you can get the experience of making games so I can get jobs making games, going and getting a degree in game development at the game development school. You gotta if you wanna run a marathon, you better start running, and if you want to make games, you better hone that skill and start making games. And there are so many ways that you can do this, and there's so many resources out there to help you. You can literally just Google start making games, and you can find so many avenues for you to start. And hey, if you still don't know where to start, you can always reach out to me, reach out to Ashraf, reach out to so many other people that are in the process, and tell them, hey, how can I start making games? And they will bombard you with links. So just do that.
Absolutely. And I would just add, like, you can also talk to your communities. Like, I've been in contact with almost every community in every Arab country. So wherever you are in the world, you're most likely going to find a community that you can talk to. There's Arabic Games, there's the Gaming Academy, there's country name game developers. So there are tons of resources all over that you can definitely use, plus tutorials online. So
see, Ashraf is already bombarding you with links. Definitely reach out.
Absolutely. And speaking of reaching out, how can people, talk to you?
Of course, they can reach out to me. I'm on everything social, so you can find me at Twitter at Fawzi Mesmar on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Fawzi Mesmar. You can find me over there. You can go into my website. It's fawzi.zone, so you can find me over there. You can listen to me blab about video games with two other game developers, Osama Dorias and Rami Ismail at the Habibis. So you can go to thehabibis.com and listen to us talk about game design, game culture, and Arab culture every now and then. And I also on Instagram at Fawzi Mesmar. You can find my public profile there and see what shenanigans I'm up to.
Fawzi, so just a few more questions, I guess. So first one is, what are you reading or watching? Second one is, who would you love to shadow for a day and just, learn from or just check out and stuff? What do you feel most people misunderstand about the things that you work in as a game designer, and whose work do you admire most, and what have they done that inspires you?
What am I reading right now? I'm currently reading a book by Eric Fromm called Escape from Freedom. It's a really interesting philosophy book that I'm really enjoying. And what am I watching? I'm watching The Mandalorian season 3. What would you love to? Who would you love to shadow for a day? Absolutely has to be the late Satoru Iwata, who was the president of Nintendo and a person. I guess I can answer two questions in the same time. Is a person that I admire the most in the games industry and I really look up to, and has inspired me a lot in my career. Satoru Iwata has left a big mark on a lot of people's lives, mine included. What do people most misunderstand about your work? So many. I get so many things, but probably the most common one is that they say, "Oh, you make video games, so you must be playing games all day long," and that is probably the most common misunderstandings, because making games is so hard. I don't think I play as many games as I used to because I'm so busy making games. That's a very common misconception. No, we're mostly working really hard, and when we're running the game to test it, it is broken and it's terrible, and we are trying to make it good, and it's a fun experience in its own right, but it's definitely not playing games.
Cool, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having a chance to talk to us, and it's a pleasure. So
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yalla. Take care. We'll speak soon.
You too.